You're listening to Signals from the Core, a podcast about adventuring in the core sector of the Mongoose Traveller 2nd Edition role-playing game. This is where the bureaucracy is dangerous, the nobles are lethal, and where power, paranoia, and prestige collide. I'm Captain Aurelius, and I'll be your host. In each episode, we explore the tangled heart of the Third Imperium through original story hooks, people of interest, encounters, locations, and the tools you need to bring high-stakes, low-trust campaigns to life. If your crew is headed for the throne world, buckle up, because here in the core, secrets don't stay buried. Not for long. 3 levels down in a capital arcology, in a maintenance bay that hasn't tasted real daylight in a generation, somebody's watching a celebrity chef plate a dish they'll never eat, on a world they'll never see. It dropped this week, straight off a distro feed from the hottest studio in Turthu. They've already run it 4 times this shift. From AppG to CamC, Anther to Karnika, on the giant private vid bays of high-end floating cloud suites and exclusive sky plateaus, to the cracked screen of last year's iDeck clutched in a street urchin's hand in the slums of Mishar, these stars shine equally as bright. The same faces are playing on billions of other screens this week. Liners and port lounges, belter messes and noble salons, every one of them getting it at different moments, every one of them certain they're watching something current. Faces and places doing the fantastic things they've only dreamt of. The core builds its idols taller than anywhere else in the Imperium, and the people here worship them harder for it. They're the superstars of the greatest star empire the galaxy has ever known. This week, on Signals from the Core, we're looking at celebrity and fame across the core sector of the Third Imperium. But before we get started, if you'd like to share thoughts with me on the show, or any of your ideas for it, drop me a line at coresignalsmail@gmail.com, or follow me at signalsfromthecore.bsky.social over on Blue Sky. You'll find the address in the show notes, and please don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really helps me out a lot. And now, let's get on with it. Let's start today with a look at what some of the source materials from Mongoose tell us about how celebrity and fame work in the game. There's not a lot, but I've picked out a few things I want to go over, and we'll start first with the setup of what I call the legend of the core. And this is from the Third Imperium sourcebook by Christopher Griffin. I'm quoting. For those who never managed to travel the core, the myths remain larger than life. This sector is thought to be a magical place, a hallowed region of space as unattainable as it is distant. While millions of Sophonts travel among the stars at some point in time, the fact is that most remain on their worlds of origin for the duration of their lives. To a belter in the empty quarter, a merchant in the Spinward Marches, or a starport administrator in the Solomone Rim, the core is just a place seen in holovids or read about in daily news feeds. Some travelers dream of seeing its wonders for a lifetime, but only a privileged few actually make the long journey to the core and capital, perhaps affording them a visit to the grand palace of Arbalatra itself. So for me, right off the top, this tells me and sells me on an aspect of the core sector that it sort of breeds celebrity. That the very culture here is both exploitable and exportable by the clever, entrepreneurial, and of course, the politically motivated. A number of times in the book, we learn about art exhibits, reenactments of great battles, feasts and banquets, and all sorts of other entertainment across many different subsectors in the core. All of this, to me, would be packaged and distributed for public consumption by the huge media conglomerates here or the Ministry of Information itself, which we'll dive into later in the show. We learn about celebrity shipwreck hunters searching for famous lost wreckages for salvage and adventure, and holovid documentaries about newly discovered wrecks being among the most popular forms of entertainment available throughout the sector. That's right from the source book. There's a whole sidebar on that. We're told about one of my favorite things in the core and how that also cultivates and boosts celebrity and fame and fortune, in which I promise we'll get to as a focus in an upcoming episode, and that is the analytic run and how those who've completed it become celebrities, and many of whom have leveraged their fame to acquire greater social standing and prosperity. We get a peek at the role of Villani culinary entertainment, which, and I'll read that segment from the book as well. Quoting, "A popular entertainment trend in the subsector is a rash of shugeli shows, holovid series that celebrate the Villani tradition of food processing. The hosts of the shows travel the subsector, showing people how to process flora and fauna from its worlds. The most popular of them is shugeli, apologies in advance, shugeli shimiri kuki, in which the host hunts a multitude of animal species and shows how to field process the animals, using each and every bit for consumption and other uses. The hosts of the popular shows are huge celebrities in Parait and Apgi, but less known elsewhere. And one of the notable personalities provided to us in Singularity is Dunka Gunki, or Gunkii, who was also featured in Core Adventure 1, Invasive Species. And I'll read a little bit of his profile here. Gunkii is the host of the popular show Shugeli Shamir Kuki, featured widely on Villani cultural worlds. Gunkii is always looking for new culinary discoveries, and a voyage on one of the official routes would provide many new topics for his show. He's also an avid hunter for edible animal life, which could provide additional adventure opportunities for the travelers as well. So we get a real sense in all of this that the far future version of reality TV is a main through line to celebrity and fame here. At least that's kind of my read on it, right? But we know there's more to it than that too. Though there isn't a lot of detail to go on or background information to be gleaned, we do get a determined passengers table on page 47 of the Singularity sourcebook that lists out a number of passenger types, right? And in Singularity, we're told that A mix of the rich, powerful, famous, and infamous are all interested in traveling aboard the grand luxury liner in the campaign. And we're given this D66 table of wealthy corporate and aristocratic options, political figures, underworld types, and then we also get influencers on this table, which feel a lot like the sort of celebrity figures we're interested here on today's episode. Options on the table include sponsored academic, wealthy academic, high-ranking academic, religious figure, religious leader, famous chef, famous critic, famous explorer, public figure, media personality, famous journalist, famous media creator, professional athlete, pop star, media superstar, and entertainment mogul. So that gives referees and players a wide berth of options for the sorts of celebrities that find fame and status in charted space. And certainly in the core sector, right? There's a lot of wiggle room there and a lot of food for ideas and thoughts. Like media personality, you could do anything with that. Famous journalists, though, I mean, they're famous for a reason. So how would a journalist be famous in the core? And what could you come up with there? Famous media creator. Okay, that's somebody who's like, influential because they're creating their own media, and how do they figure out how to distribute that in the core? Media superstar versus pop star. What sets those apart? The table only gives you the detail at this level, and you're free as the referee to fill in the blanks of what that means. But to me, it means these are the types of figures who become famous and celebrities in the core, outside of the other buckets that were given where, underworld types, they're infamous, political figures, obviously, right? And then the wealthy corporates and nobles, that kind of speaks for itself. But this is a kind of celebrity that you can really sort of dig into and hasn't been truly defined in Traveller, which is kind of what we're attempting to do today, at least my take on it. There's also a lot to borrow from or learn from in the new Infinity Suite campaign from Mongoose, written by Martin J. Doherty, the prolific stalwart of Traveller materials for many, many years. And through many editions of the game, I find, as I immerse myself more in Traveller, well, not just Mongoose second edition, but previous editions as well, Martin J. Doherty is someone you see his name over and over and over again. And I highly recommend, too, by the way, the interviews he's done over the years with Cyborg Prime on YouTube that take place during the annual May Day festivities. They're great. I love them a lot, and you can learn a lot from them, too. So check those out. But insights from Infinity Suite. So it gives us a really great look at what fame and celebrity look like in the Third Imperium, and more importantly, what it takes to maintain that fame. Though this is presented as game mechanics for travelers and referees to measure and build fame, you can easily extrapolate the behavior and actions required to build, increase, and sustain a level of stardom in charted space. This involves, putting on genuinely good shows, getting reviewed well for it, which gives you like a dice modifier toward your fame. So, like I said, it's mechanics, right? I won't dig it apart here because it's that's beside the point. I do really like the mechanics a lot, but that's too much for now. I'll just sort of high level it. You build a name just as fast by being seen, live in the things that you do to become famous is more than just performance, right? It's all of the trappings around it. Living to excess, buying things no sane person would buy, I think, as it's presented in the book. It's basically making a spectacle out of yourself, right? You trash a hotel suite, smash your gear on stage when you're in the band. You pick up dice modifiers the first time you do it. Pull outrageous stunts enough, like grav shooting off a penthouse balcony, or skip the bill at an expensive restaurant, or other examples that it gives. You get more dice modifiers. And if you go so far over the line that a planetary government bans your act, you get even more. So it's, like I said, it's that making a spectacle of yourself is also how you sort of increase your fame. I found that really super interesting. It's the Imperium kind of handing you notoriety prizes for just being too much. But it also kind of outlines the fragility of fame too, and how it's not a bank balance that you build once and keep. You can also lose it. And so the book kind of outlines how that happens too. Like if you have a flop or a disastrous showing, you're going to lose fame, right? You kind of lose momentum. And it also tends to dribble away the less you do. If you go quiet, stop screaming for the cameras, you bleed fame too. You have to roll negative dice modifiers when you're out of the public eye, unless you're in jump space. It's one of the caveats that the book gives you, where, nobody would be watching you anyway, but they may be kind of tracking your moves that, oh yeah, they're in transit. It also penalizes repetition, right? So your stunts have a shelf life. You do the same outrageous thing twice and the crowd will end up just yawning, and you're going to lose fame that way too. It also gives a look at the tiers of celebrity, which is really helpful too. They have unknown, C-list, B-list, A-list, superstars, and then right on top you've got the megastars. So each rung gives you bigger modifiers, but also kind of helps you frame how celebrity is structured. Like it gives you this real kind of tight framework that you can use throughout your game to sort of frame up and stage how to think about celebrity as a system, not just for travelers. Like this is for referees too. Even if your travelers aren't the celebrities, as a referee, if you're building celebrities, you can use this as a toolkit to measure their own fame. So you could kind of, the way I'm thinking about this, you could use this when rolling up NPCs to figure out what level of fame they have, which will help determine what reaction checks they get. With a high enough profile lets them stroll past rules everyone else has to follow, or demand accommodations no concierge would ever usually grant, or lean on port officials to push through paperwork that they shouldn't have cleared. Like fame can become a skeleton key at a certain level, and that gives a referee a lot to work with, I guess is my point. And while Infinity Suite specifically is about a rock band, none of this is really intrinsically tied or has to be only with rock bands, right? It assumes a rock act or a rap superstar or an electric orchestra as alternatives that it provides. But if you think about the engine underneath it, it doesn't care what your celebrity actually does for a living. You swap the musical gigs for a holovid premiere, or championship bouts in combat fighting, or some null G arena sport, or accounts planet-wide broadcast for political. The review favorability mechanic presented in this book reads the outcome and pays or punishes the same way regardless of the performance, right? Consumption and stunts, they need no translation at all. It's actually kind of fun to extrapolate how this would work for other forms of celebrity and entertainment. Another concept I really like in this one is the reality distortion. That's kind of like, once you're famous enough, people assume your mistakes were deliberate genius. And, if an A-lister unveils a hideous painting or a celebrity chef plates something inedible, you roll star status to find out whether the room just applauds anyway or accepts it anyway. So you could easily pour all of this into the core game, even though this, I should mention, I did a reel on Instagram and a YouTube short that talked about this, but it takes place in the island subsector. But the concepts behind this campaign are just, to me, ready-made for the plucking and placing straight into the core. And I can't stress that enough, man. I love this campaign for those reasons. Even if there are things about the campaign that I would never run stem to stern, A to Z, there's so much here that made it so worth the money. And I pre-ordered the hard copy too, so I dropped the $50 so that I'll have this on my shelf too. And I'm just so glad I did. So anyway, oversell over. The point is, there was a lot here that I was excited to read about all week while I was prepping for this episode. And I was like, man, I've got to find room to talk about this in the next episode of the podcast. Similarly, I'm finding a lot of great material to mine from in the Mongoose first edition book 8, Dilettante. Mechanically, in that book, while fame is intricately, obviously tied to the social characteristic, as you might suspect, the book also provides a lot of excellent information on the benefits and privileges that accompany fame and notoriety in the Imperium. As ever, though, neither of these things are written specifically for the core sector in mind. But the thing to always remember about the core, my rule of thumb, is that in the core, everything that's set within or presented for how things work more broadly across the Third Imperium are amplified in the core due to 3 things: proximity to power and prestige, right? Proximity, power, prestige. And those are all tied together and make everything just a little more vivid and vibrant here. So what you get in these books, or what I'm getting from them, is that whether I'm looking for ideas and rules for traveler adventures where my players are the rich and famous, and wanting to create characters who are high social standing and have achieved a level of fame and want to play that way, you get tools for that. Or if they're just bumping into and rubbing elbows with the famous and with celebrities, there's a ton to work with and transplant from these books into your game that way too. So you can learn through these books how, as a referee, to portray celebrities. And I find that, to me, just as valuable, because, to be honest, I don't know that a lot of my players would ever care about playing as the rich and famous necessarily. But I can tell you that there's a ton of fun to be had when they're rubbing up against them or bumping up against them, becoming the pawns of them or the employed by them. That's one of the things that just always drew me to the core sector to begin with, are opportunities for that to happen here more than anywhere else. Dilettante in particular has given me a lot to think about in terms of additional options for careers and career assignments, though, too, during character creation. But it's always the way the lens I approach that through is that fall from grace, right? Where you grew up in and started your career as someone who had a trajectory of becoming rich, famous, a celebrity, and something happened, and now you're a traveler. And what's that story? And what's your journey back? Or how are you navigating through that? That's also a very fun and compelling seed or kernel and motivation for adventure in the core. The point of today's episode, though, is to dive into how celebrity works, not just throughout the Imperium, but specifically in the core, and how to portray it as a referee, ways to encounter it, and also to share some general ideas for the flavor of how it works in the setting in that age of sail style slow crawl of information. Because we're also attuned to the instant media access and direct real-time celebrity influence in our real lives. That for me, it always comes down to just sitting back and thinking about how something like this works when media isn't real time or always on. Like there's no interstellar 24/7 always on social media feed in Traveller. Twitter doesn't exist. Now, there are planets, certainly, and it's probably beyond anything we've experienced in our current timeline and tech level to comprehend that, because of, especially in the core, some of the tech levels that just far outstrip what Earth is. And that's fun to play with too. But from planet to planet, across planets, across the vast reaches of space, even within the core sector alone, let alone across the entirety of the Imperium, it's different. It has to be. So what does that take? What's it made of to distribute celebrity and fame across those reaches of space? What does it take to become famous? What do they have to do to reach that level of fame? But then also away from just the celebrities themselves to those who allow it, right? Because you have to think that in a setting like this, if the Imperium doesn't want you to be famous, you're not going to be famous. So what factors into that too? And the answer in my game is the Ministry of Information, right? They're the Imperium's public relations and messaging apparatus. And I've kind of hinted at this before when we did the episode on bureaucracy. I have a whole bunch I've documented the ministries that I find kind of the most important. And I have a whole kind of fictional framework and setup for how the ministries work in my game that I'll get into on a future episode. If folks are interested, let me know. coresignalsmail@gmail.com or follow me on Blue Sky. Links in the show notes. But we can get into that. But I'm going to give just the kind of the high level of what the Ministry of Information is in the way I think about it in my Traveller universe. So they're the ones responsible for managing the flow of information within and beyond the Imperium, or especially throughout the Imperium. These are the ones who oversee official communications, Imperial propaganda, news media regulation, and public information campaigns. This includes, obviously, the Imperial public messaging, what's on message, crisis communication, right? How do you deal with it when things go wrong? State propaganda and image control, right? How do you want people to see the emperor and the apparatus around him? And then the coordination of official news and broadcasts from capital and all the kind of main important worlds. It also maintains the archives of Imperial records, supervises civilian data networks, and coordinates censorship where state security is concerned. In practice, the Ministry of Information serves as both the publicity arm and a political tool, shaping narratives favorable to the emperor and suppressing those deemed destabilizing. While it presents itself as the guardian of truth and accuracy in imperial communications, there's also the aspect where it's what I call its information control bureaus quietly collaborate with imperial intelligence to monitor public sentiment and preempt dissent, and kind of pull those levers with both positive and sort of negative image control, right? We'll get into it at some point, but they boost villains sometimes just as much as they do heroes to deflect attention from or negative attention from the Imperium itself. They kind of give you that, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Look at this villain over here, right? So there's some of that happening too that you should keep in mind, or that I like to keep in mind when I'm thinking about things like this. Its reach extends across holo broadcasts, news feeds, even academic publications, with sector-level information offices tasked to, quote-unquote, harmonize local reporting with official imperial policy. Right? How do they calibrate that? The ministry also issues formal directives to megacorporate media subsidiaries to ensure consistent messaging across the Imperium's 11,000 worlds. That's sort of my take on the Ministry of Information. So in a setting, though, where the news takes a week just to crawl a parsec away or a couple of parsecs away, depending on jump, whoever gets their hands on it before it lands is holding every card that counts. You don't necessarily get famous in the Imperium just because you're good, right? Or it doesn't matter if you're the best, right? It helps, but this is, to me, a quantity over quality situation here. In the Third Imperium, you get famous because your story got picked up and pushed out along the official feeds to 100 worlds while you were asleep 3 jumps away. And who signs off on that push, right? The Ministry of Information. To me, that's my setup for this. Because again, it comes back to, if the Imperium doesn't want you to be famous, it's going to be really freaking hard for you to be famous. So I've tied the Ministry of Information intrinsically into how you become and stay a celebrity in this game. Because they decide whose name rides the X-boats out to the black and whose name is just sort of evaporates and disappears and stops being shown on the feeds. And sure, those information control bureaus that I talked about, they'll swear up and down that they're only keeping everyone honest, checking facts. It's very dull, nothing to see here. But meanwhile, they have a direct line running with Imperial intelligence, and they're absolutely taking the temperature of the masses and leaning on anything that smells like it is about to become a problem. So the way I look at it is, if the throne likes the look of you, you'll go a long way. If it doesn't, you're not going anywhere. And in fact, sometimes you get vilified. You become the villain as a distraction to sort of divert people's attention. Names get made in the core where the Imperial grip is the tightest more easily than anywhere else. And the Ministry of Information has its thumb on the scale, which is a hell of a thing for your players to clock eventually, especially if they're playing the famous ones, quote unquote, when they realize that somebody built them up on purpose and that somebody can just as easily tear them down. And oh, by the way, why were they picked to become famous to begin with? Why was that allowed? And what were the ulterior motives there? There's all sorts of things that you can play with as the referee there to tease your players and get your players in trouble with there as well. And specifically, when it comes specifically to celebrity and fame in the core sector, the thing to keep in mind is that when you're famous in the core sector and being this close to the throne, that fame is amplified differently because of the proximity to power and the attention that likely comes with it. So the singer who performs at a Capitol reception, or the sports star, grav ball striker from an important high population world, or a lecturer with a Silean University posting on Capitol, the noble heir with a good face but a bad habit. Not one of them becomes famous the way a frontier scout does, or a folk hero out in the marches would. Right? That it hits different here. Their reputations move through court circles, noble patronage, and grand institutional academies. They show up in more ubiquitous media feeds or sports syndicates distributed via the Expo network faster than anywhere else in charted space. And somewhere in that passage of information, the reputation gets filtered, sponsored, repeated, stitched into the Imperial story. There's an extent to which you got to imagine there's some bread and circuses going on here, right? So, and what does that look like? What are the scales there? So, core fame weighs more than ordinary popularity. The beloved performer turns into a symbol of imperial grace, whether she wanted the job or not. A disgraced athlete drags his sponsors into the gossip cycle with him. A historian can become a household name by handing the public a kinder story about the long night than the one that's in the archives, right? The buried secrets. A young aristocrat with the right title and the right scandal can be saturating feeds from capital to Apki, while the local news 2 sectors over is still just working out his name. So the thing to keep in mind through all of this is how fame spreads, right? And I'll reiterate it. Everything here runs off one constraint. Information travels at the speed of jump. So fame moves in a staggered wave or cluster rather than a flash. Nothing goes viral across a gulf of parsecs because that gulf is measured in weeks, right? A reputation that's white hot on Capitol lands late and outdated on the periphery, by which point the official relays and the expo offices and the repackaged entertainment have already turned it into something its own subject might not even remember. And that's something cool to kind of keep in mind. But that lag is also what keeps the famous alive. There's that to keep in mind as well. Worlds get these stories at different times. So one figure stays current for years on the strength of a single rolling campaign of notoriety. The scandal still breaking rimward while it's already dull history in the core and hasn't even arrived out in the spinward marches. In the core, where the ships and the dinner invitations never stop, a celebrity can keep turning up in fresh venues while last season's news is still in transit to Regina. Fame here has a half-life, and you measure it in courier runs. For the table, treat any character's fame as a networked asset with 4 levers. Right? This is my advice to referees. Keep these 4 things in mind when you're kind of running, quote unquote, fame. There's its radius, meaning who has actually heard of the people or the travelers in this case. There's its sponsor, or who keeps the name in circulation. then its audience, who's buying what the name is selling, and then its half-life, meaning how long before the story goes stale and needs refreshing. So some of those mechanics we talked about in the Infinity Suite play in here. Within each of these, you could have patrons, complications, and seeds for adventure for a creative referee. And that, to me, is magical. So that's some background, and that's how it moves across the core and across the Third Imperium. But what are the stars? What are the celebrities? We touched on this a little bit with the table from Singularity, but just to emphasize it a little bit more, give some more kind of color to it. The core can manufacture famous people faster than anywhere else because all of the mechanisms to do so are present here in greater scale. There are more patrons with money, more couriers, more outlets, more court functions, more liners moving between worlds that matter and worlds that count, and a population that treats status as its first language. So fame here is ratified more than it's earned. Keep that in mind. You become notable by doing a thing. You stay notable by fastening yourself to a sponsor, whether that's a noble house or imperial ministry, a media consortium, a luxury liner circuit that you keep touring, or you just have ins and connections at just the right starport scene where the right people are present and will help spread the word about what you're doing. The Ministry of Information, which I mentioned earlier and often, sorts the talent into safe, useful, flattering, and inconvenient. It almost never conjures talent out of nothing, but it gloms onto it and decides which talent gets repeated. And the repetition is the entire game here. So that's the stage for celebrity. And the core breeds 4 working categories, the way I see it. 4 working categories, and a referee should know which one a famous NPC belongs to when deciding how the players in the world treats them. All right, so we'll kind of break it down. These are the 4 buckets I sort of think about, at least now. Everything's sort of evolving. But you've got court celebrity. This is the oldest one, and the one the core does better than anywhere else. Right? These are the people who are famous for being near power. The Emperor's confidants, the Archduke of Celia's circle, the high officers of the great ministries, the senior nobilities whose estates cluster within a few parsecs of capital. Their fame isn't so much earned by any single act, it just sort of accumulates. A man can be a household name across a dozen subsectors because he sat at the right table for 30 years, and most people who know his name couldn't tell you the thing that he's actually done or accomplished, but he's just there because he's in proximity, he's a known person, and damn it, his name is always in the news. The core is thick with this kind of celebrity because the core is where these tables are. This is where this scene is. And you can be famous just for being part of that tapestry. Then you've got, obviously, the mass entertainment celebrity. This is the manufactured kind. Actors, musicians, sensation performers, the hosts of programs that fill the long kind of distro schedules, distribution. I just kind of use it. I've supplanted broadcast with distro in my shorthand. So instead of things being broadcast, they're distroed. But they're on the distro schedules of 100 worlds, right? Hundreds of worlds. The core has the deepest entertainment markets in charted space because it has the population, the money, and the oldest media institutions. A core sensation star is famous across a sphere it would take months to physically cross, which means the star and the fame have a strange relationship. If you think about this, the performer ages, retires, maybe dies, but the distro keeps arriving. Their entertainers more famous on the core's rimward marches than they are at home, because the rimward worlds are watching material the core worlds finished with ages ago in some aspects. That's really cool to play with. Then you've got the achievement celebrity. This covers the people who are famous for a verifiable thing that they've done. A scout who charted something, naval officer who won something, researchers whose work changed an industry, an explorer back from someone genuinely far off, right? War heroes, people of merit. The core produces actually, in some aspects, fewer of these than the frontier does, and values them, though, more for being rarer. A decorated frontier hero passing through the core is a prize, and the salons here compete for them. The hero who did the actual thing is frequently bewildered by the people who are famous for doing, compared to what they've accomplished, relatively nothing, but treated better in a lot of aspects. But if you think about it, some of the things that I talked about in this, the scout who charted something, the naval officer who, won something, those achievements rarely happen within the core. Right? Discovering new worlds, the big skirmishes and conflicts, all kind of happen outside of the core. So that notoriety takes a little bit longer to reach core, but once it does, they're considered a rare commodity. Because again, the Ministry of Information would prop them up. Heroes of the Imperium. Coming to capital, coming to the core, on a tour of core, maybe even meeting the emperor. What would that be like? And then finally, notoriety is the fourth. And the core specializes in this, right? This is this is where things get messy. The disgraced minister, a noble caught in a financial scandal, celebrated criminals, heretics, an officer accused or cashiered for something the broadsheets enjoyed. The core manufactures notoriety as efficiently as it manufactures fame, using the same machinery too. I touched on this. I hinted at this earlier. It's that kind of bread and circuses mentality. And the fall from fame to misfortune, from one to the other, can be very fast. The same dense media that takes a year to carry your fame outward would carry your ruin at exactly the same speed, which means a disgraced core celebrity has a little bit of a window, the weeks to months before the news catches up with them, during which they're still being received as the person they were. And you could play with that too, especially if you're kind of going away from the core. Keep in mind the reverse is true too. If you're disgraced, you can outrun that disgrace for a little while and still use your previous fame and fortune name, but then find yourself in a situation where the news catches up with you. That's kind of fun too. But keep in mind, like the notoriety in being notorious, infamous, right? This fourth pillar, that's the one that is the bread and circuses mentality, the little deflection stuff that happens, that there are things to play with here. The folks that the Ministry of Information tears down for a reason, to give the masses someone to hate, to deflect from something else. So how is all this distributed? Well, Holovid is the loudest thing, right? The big capital studios and talent agencies and labels and gossip feeds, they set the weather for popular culture across the whole sector. We talked about Turthu a little bit in the last episode, when we broke down the cities of the core, or of capital, sorry. And in my Traveller universe, Turthu is where the bulk of this happens. The product shipped from here travels best and lands hardest because it looks expensive and arrives wearing the implied blessing of proximity to the throne. A Turthu production is a brand, especially on the new premium distro feed that I call DataNet, which is kind of my thing. But one of these days I'll release all of this information. And so that's probably a superfluous detail right now, but that's what I call it. DataNet is kind of a big thing in my games. And the vids and entertainments produced here sell billions of people a version of Imperial life that they accept as emotionally true, with every inconvenient detail sanded off for distro. And the gossip press is tolerated because it pays its way, right? A managed scandal smothers an unmanaged one. A noble divorce, hard run across all the feeds, can bury a naval procurement that went badly. A different scandal. A celebrity feud gives the public a safer thing to hate than a duke or a ministry or a policy that's unraveling, which is the whole reason tabloid things are allowed to be distributed. Like, to me, I think that's why, pirates and criminals can be allowed to become folk heroes in the Imperium, because they can be used as a distraction from something far worse in the ministry's eyes, is kind of how I rationalize that. So a few final thoughts, a few more thoughts on just how to process fame in the core and the density of it in the core. The origin of media here goes into the expo system carrying advantages. The formal traffic rules pretend aren't there, right? They use advantages that they just kind of don't admit to. The Imperial announcements, governor's communications, approved cultural material, scout updates, Navy bulletins, and major commercial feeds all get priority in practice, regardless of what the schedule claims. So a middling singer on Capital ends up known on Vland before a far better one in the Reft sector is known even closer to home. Right? They just kind of, it's about priority and how things are kind of shipped faster on purpose when they want that notoriety to have a far reach. And to some degree, in the core, the density does all the work. Right? When you're here, where everything is just so clustered and so densely populated and pretty, close together, with the densest export routes, in faster distribution systems, the volume of hundreds of millions, billions of screens and entertainment devices in high tech level media corporations, the passenger traffic that never lets up, the enough loose money to keep attention burning over and over and over. That's the scale. The audience never gets the quiet stretch it would need to forget anyone. This is a machine constantly revolving and moving at pace. In the celebrities tour, right? A name of any size works the circuit. They're sent on junkets, moving through capital, the Silean worlds, all of those important areas, all of the biggest, most important places in the core get access to the celebrities. In all of those high population systems are afforded that opportunity. And every stop throws off its own coverage and its own receptions, and that leads to security scares or its own kind of crop of rumors that can come into play. These are all kernels and seeds that referees can use for their players to have their brushes with celebrities or get caught up in it as well. So, for the referee, run core celebrity as an adventure engine, because the famous person is hardly ever only famous, right? It's not, the point isn't that they're just, oh, it's a famous person and you're kind of starstruck. Look behind it. There's a patron behind them, or a faction, an office, a family, a debt, a buried secret, a public image that somebody will maybe wants to squash or kill, or kill to defend, right? There's all sorts of things, trappings around this that you can play with. A scandal-prone heir with a following hires the travelers for discreet transport and walks them straight into a succession fight he doesn't even understand he's part of. Or an archaeologist, new find, puts an old house claim into question. Right? There's a new truth uncovered that somebody would prefer not circulated or not surfaced. An artifact that never reached the far end of the voyage. Right? Kill it. Or you can play with like the sports aspect too, where a sports club or a sports league, a team needs to get off a world quietly after fixing a match, or just the accusation that it happened. A sector journalist starts asking the kind of questions about a crew's cargo and the crew's patron, and a job 2 jumps back that they are not comfortable with, or they don't have answers that they want surfaced. A court poet pays really well, almost too well, to carry a manuscript whose verses read to the right reader as an accusation aimed at a duke. Coded language. What would that be like? And a disgraced singer is hiding out from a contract that turns out to read more like an indentured servitude than a typical engagement. These are things to just always kind of keep in mind. What could you do with this? How could you use this and leverage this in play for the travelers? It's glamorous, yes, but more to the point, it's useful. And most importantly, keep in mind that it should never quite feel safe. Well, at long last, it is time for another patron profile. It's been a long time since we've done one of these, but I'm very excited by this one. I call this guy Ansel Drevane, and it's kind of just my take at a celebrity that we could play with. And an adventure seed will be kind of part and parcel of this as well. So Ansel Drevane, his homeworld is capital in the core, but he's always on the move. His occupation, he's a celebrity chef, a travel documentarian, and a government-subsidized cultural personality, kind of an unofficial cultural envoy. His notable works include being the author of a data pack, which is in my Traveller universe, I call data packs. They're like books, a data pack called Culinary Voyager from Rim to Core. And he's the host of a widely popular datanet, which I referred to earlier in the show, a datanet holovid show called Culinary Voyager. But he formerly hosted a show called Core Cuisine with a rival distributor. So there's some things that you could, the creative ref could play with there as well. That he left the rival distributor to go to datanet and start a new show, Culinary Voyager, which is based off of his data pack book, Culinary Voyager from Rim to Core. He's got Imperial backing, kind of low key, though. He's often subsidized by Imperial ministries like the Ministry of Information, as well as the Ministry of Travel and Tourism, to glamorize travel, showcase the Imperium's shared cultural tapestry, and demonstrate an openness to blending cultural traditions. That's kind of his secret mandate from the ministries that he doesn't like to really talk about too much. His background and reputation: Ansel was trained at prestigious core sector culinary academies and institutions, where he mastered the refined traditions of core sector cuisine. However, his breakout success came when he championed frontier and rimward food, elevating the flavors of belter stews and desert world spirits, and tasty morsels and agricultural colony harvests, turning that all into hot cuisine. This daring approach won him both acclaim and notoriety. His public persona is charismatic, witty, a little irreverent, and unafraid to poke fun at both nobles and bureaucrats in the same breath. He has a dry humor and a biting commentary, which have made him a cultural sensation. His style is a mix of sardonic wit with warm charm. He's not afraid to highlight the grit of a place and a location, and he's known for breaking bread with locals and exposing audiences to both the high table of nobles and the low bowl of starport street vendors. He's hugely popular across datanet, which is one of the fastest rising Turthu-based distributors on Capital. And he's watched by nobles, citizens, belters alike. Everybody loves him. While officially billed as entertainment, his expeditions are quietly used as propaganda to bolster pro-Imperial sentiment and make interstellar travel feel glamorous, adventurous, and most importantly, safe. He's got a team of 2 people who are kind of always with him. Pella Dash, who's his producer. This is the fixer who wrangles permits and negotiates, quote unquote, with local authorities. She's a hard-edged, cynical, and pragmatic woman from Apgi. Or is it Apg? Apg, maybe? One of these days I have to figure out how I pronounce these worlds in my Traveller universe. Let me know how you pronounce some of these things if you disagree. I know we play in core, so it's less prominent, but I know out in the Spinward Marches there's a Regina debate. So maybe there's an Apgi debate that we can start. It's less fun, I know, but anyway. She manages licenses, logistics, smooths over obstacles, greases palms, and cuts deals with governments, planetary governments, to allow filming, and she's fiercely loyal to Ansel. And then we've got Rick Halves, a tech operator. That he's a brilliant but trouble-prone young drone pilot and sound light engineer. He's the tech guy. He keeps the holo rigs running, launches drones for dramatic panoramic shots, edits the footage on the fly, and is constantly testing risky new gear. That's his thing. He's got a habit of capturing things authorities would rather hide, which can often lead to complications because he's always filming, always shooting. And how could you use Ansel in an adventure? Well, I've got an adventure hook we'll get to really quickly. I call it the taste of danger. And this is the premise here. I'm just gonna read it. Ansel Drevane insists on filming an episode of Culinary Voyager on Mu'u, which is in the Parit subsector. Mu'u. It's an amber zone world infamous for danger, but renowned for its exotic cuisine and unusual take on Shigili culinary practices. Officially, Ansel has quote-unquote bribed a ministry official to obtain the proper permits necessary for going to Mu'u, despite its amber zone classification. Unofficially, Imperial officials are using the shoot as a cover to observe the conditions on the ground. Ansel hires the travelers for protection and dives into the thick of it, catching the party between local unrest, hidden ministry objectives, and his own stubborn refusal to quit when the food is just, quote unquote, too good to miss. So why does he pick the travelers? Well, he wants an escort who can handle the quote unquote unexpected, hiring the party as guides, fixers, cultural liaisons. One of the things that I kind of thought of when I was developing this scenario is that Mu'u is is part of the Villani spur in Singularity. So if you're kind of using the liner routes presented to you in that campaign, this would fit seamlessly in that. If you ever kind of decided to do the Villani spur, Mu'u is right along two of the stops on that junket. So that's why I picked Mu'u. Also, there's not a ton written about it in the source material, so that's a huge, awesome playground that I really love. That gets into interpreting the UWP. How would we play with this? Which we'll get into. Or let me know, coresignalsmail@gmail.com if you want to learn more. Maybe, I can give you some stuff to think about there as well. Why the travelers? He uses his considerable influence to secure special travel waivers to the Amber Zone and clearances for the group. So he kind of convinces them, like, hey, he's smoothed everything over between he and Pella. And the travelers are offered handsome credit payouts and promised visibility. Like, he's going to immortalize them in holovid distro across the Imperium, right? That's, maybe something that's in it for the travelers too. Some complications to consider, that what's happening in the Amber Zone. Like, why is Mu'u even an Amber Zone to begin with? I've got some interpretations I'm playing with there too, because like I said, there's not a lot here. This is a veritable playground for creativity here, because all you know is the UWP, that it's an Amber Zone, and as far as I can tell, there's not a ton written about this place at all in the Parade subsector. So you could play with a lot of things here: the political unrest, hostile alien fauna, criminal cartel involved there. Like, just what is it about this place that gave it that Amber Zone status to begin with? You can also play with some of the little nuggets that I gave you about Rick with his drones inadvertently capturing footage the local government wants buried, or he's not supposed to be shooting. It could be riots, contraband trade, Villani, separatist agitators. Sky's the limit. Or you could play with the idea that Pella, who, remember I said, fiercely loyal to Ansel, has standing orders or agreement with the ministry involved here that if things go badly, the travelers are expendable, but Ansel is not. And she's absolutely down with that because fiercely loyal, right? And then, just playing with a twist here, Ansel's not naive. He knows that the ministry is using him, and he deliberately plays the fool on camera while remaining highly politically aware off camera. And he knows his place in this machinery. And depending on how the travelers handle the situation, the way I see it, Ansel could become a valuable ally or a dangerous kind of witness to Imperial secrets. There's a lot you could do with this. And I always think of, I'm a recurring character kind of guy, and I would consider him a repeatable NPC with a lot of greenfield opportunities for other potential game use options down the road. He could reappear across various subsectors. He could become a source for rumors, just a contact to have, offer other unusual jobs and misadventures, VIP escort, culinary smuggling. He could get maybe starts a restaurant and he needs the travelers to help him get some really hot commodity ingredients from a planet. Like, he's not even along for the adventure. He just contacts them to say, hey man, I need you for some clandestine smuggling to get me some of this stuff because I've just opened a restaurant on Capitol. That's a potential here. Or a ministry handler insists the travelers guide Ansel to a different forbidden world to showcase a rare delicacy, or do a documentary on this, creature that's been poached into near extinction because of how widely sought after it is for its succulent meat. Or he could just have a quirk where this is his own. This is just his thing, and he's repeatedly trying to get the travelers to undertake different variations of the taste of danger on other Amber Zone worlds, and he just is always saying, "Come on, what could possibly go wrong?" He's just like, maybe his thing is going purposely to Amber Zone worlds where not a lot of people go to see what kind of culinary treats are available to him to expose to a broader audience. Like, that's kind of his thing. That becomes his kind of loop. You could play with that. Or another idea that I have that I'm kind of playing with is the producer of a rival holovid star. Like, so you could bring that Gunky from invasive species and singularity into play, where it's not him, but his producer is plotting to kidnap Ansel to expose and embarrass the Imperium for using Drevane as their mouthpiece, right? Or you could, do something with nobles trying to bribe him or coerce him into featuring their estates on his show, and playing with that idea as well. So anyway, I hope that gives you some things to think about. I know I teased last week that maybe we would talk about Jethry Lyle, and I did have some folks who reached out and said, hey, that sounds interesting. I would love to. We'll get to Jethry. I just thought that Ansel Drevane fit better into the themes of this episode. And at some point down the line, we'll take a look at kind of fashion and gear and couture of the core. I know there's some material in the Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society volumes from Mongoose that we can kind of pull in and play with there too. And I think Jethry would slot in really well with that episode. So we're going to park him for the time being. But anyway, I hope you liked Ansel Drevane. I realize this was a lot. And honestly, I'm still working through a lot of thoughts on it myself. I've actually even started writing a piece to submit for the Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society. I saw, this week that they're always open to receiving material for whenever they do another set of volumes for that. So I've started working on something for it that I would submit, or maybe to publish on my own. Who knows what I'm going to do with some of these things, but I'm always writing about and always thinking about traveler. And so I've started kind of more formally putting down a lot of my ideas from this podcast today into a written kind of digest format. Because I've just spent a lot of time noodling on it, mainly because of my ideas for running that core sandbox campaign fueled by Singularity, which I've talked extensively about, and now the new Infinity Suite, which we touched on today, just giving so many fertile seeds and ideas for ways to set games in this area of charted space. I love it, and it's also informed by my ongoing fascination with the Analytic Run too, which I know some of you are probably getting sick of me teasing and mentioning, because just get on with it and tell us about it already. What are your thoughts and ideas? And we'll get to it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you for downloading and listening. As for what's next, a few ideas I'm mulling over are the fashion and gear episode I mentioned in the last segment, and that often promised look at the Analytic Run. That's always kind of simmering in the background. And then I've also got on tap an idea for a similar episode to today's, where rather than celebrity and fame in the core, we just look at entertainment in the core and the various ways that comes to life in a little more detail. So less from the personality aspect and more from the media and mediums aspects, the formats and the gear by which entertainment is consumed. Because there are a lot of nuggets and kernels to kind of play with that as well. So let me know what you would like to hear, if you've got preferences or ideas and thoughts for other topics that you would like to know about or that you think would be fun. Write to the show. Email us at coresignalsmail@gmail.com. coresignalsmail@gmail.com, or follow along and message me on Blue Sky at signalsfromthecore.bsky.social. signalsfromthecore.bsky.social. You can find this info in our show notes, along with our link tree, to make sure you can follow along wherever I am. You can find the links to Instagram, YouTube, Blue Sky, the email, the podcast links. It's all there in the link tree. I have started doing Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts just when I have random things that I kind of want to talk about and throw out there and get them out there really quickly. So if you're into that sort of thing, follow along there. You can find the links right in that link tree in the show notes. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Head on over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you choose to listen to the show, but especially those two areas, and share your reviews, rating us. Share the show with your fellow travelers out on your social networks. Just drop a line. If you play in a group, let them know. Let them know that they can listen to the show too. Whatever you can do to help spread the word about the show, I truly, deeply appreciate it. Thank you for listening, as always. Until next time, keep your clearance valid, your comms encrypted, and your gravline out of committee oversight. Stay sharp, travelers.